So, we are going to jump into the weekend with a little bit of SAT work. I know that's probably exactly what every high schooler is wanting to do on a Friday, but we'll get it done and then you'll have done your practice for the week. So, if you don't know who I am, my name is Kate. I am a humanities tutor that works with students on things like college prep, so SAT, ACT, that kind of thing, as well as college essays and application review. I also work with students on, tutoring for core classes like English and history. I do a lot of AP tutoring. So if you have any of those needs, feel free to contact me. My website is stembrainstutor.com, and my Instagram is Your Humanities Tutor. So feel free to DM me on there or contact me through my website to set up a free consult to see, if you like my style and we can work together on getting you ready to achieve your goals. Okay. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, what we're going to do today is pick up where we left off last time. So we've done a couple of parts of this series. We are working through the SAT number 4. If you want to follow along, you can download the SAT PDF from the College Board's website directly. You're just going to look for, Google like College Board SAT practice test and download number 4. So right now, we are going to start on number 20. This is on page 24 of the document. So let's dive in. Okay. So this one, we're just going to try to identify the types of question that we're looking at. First of all, so this one is asking us to complete the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. So the kind of question that this is going to be a grammar conventions question. It's important to know what kind of question you're looking at because that will help you apply the correct strategy, the most efficient strategy, right, to answer these questions. So let's take a look. We're just going to find the blank spot and then read right around that. We don't have to read the whole thing, but let's just say, in this series, painter Howardina Pindell explored themes blank healing, self-discovery, and memory. Okay, so this would be themes of healing. So you can tell we've got the word of. This one is straight up and down just of, no punctuation necessary, because it's themes of healing, self-discovery, and memory, right? So it is just telling us what the themes are. Okay, number 21. Both Sona Charipotra, an Indian American, and Danielle Clayton, an African American, grew up frustrated by the lack of diverse characters in books for young people. So this is a similar question, right? Same kind of grammar thing. In 2011, they joined forces to found Cake Literacy, a book packaging blank company, right, that specializes in the creation and promotion. Okay, so the blank is a book packaging blank specializes in the creation and promotion. So we're going to want to say company that. So we're going to already go ahead and get rid of A and C. We don't need to put a comma here. So this one is B. The reason we wouldn't put a comma here is because it would separate the subject of this phrase, so the company, from the prepositional phrase. So what does it do? It specializes in the creation and promotion of stories, right? So that would really break our sentence structure. So we just need to make sure that the subject of the sentence and the predicate of the sentence, which is the verb plus, objects and other things, are linked. Okay, great. So that one is B. Number 22, this one, same deal. This is also a grammar question. So this one says, we found that black bears eat human food before hibernation have increased levels of a rare carbon isotope, blank, due to the higher, blah, 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 I guess this is carbon, is how I would read that out loud to you guys, in corn and cane sugar. Great. You guys are going to tell really quick that I'm a humanities tutor and not a science tutor. Okay, so we're looking for the answer carbon-13, which that's telling me how I'm supposed to read this out loud to you. Okay, so how we're going to show carbon-13 is we've got this comma right here, right, after isotope. So we know that carbon-13 is supposed to be kind of an aside from the rest of the sentence. It's supposed to tell us a little bit of information while still allowing the rest of the sentence to flow around it. So we're going to put another comma at the end of carbon-13 so that we can successfully kind of couch that aside in kind of this like hidden window, right? If you were to remove whatever's in between those commas from the sentence would still read totally fine. That's kind of your litmus test. So A is not going to work because the comma is before this abbreviation of carbon-13. We want the whole aside to be contained within the paired commas. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Same dealio with C. So we got not only this one comma here, but also another separate comma after the abbreviation. That's not going to work for us because that makes it look like an items in a series, which it is not. They're referencing the same thing. B doesn't work because it doesn't have the comma. Like I said, we want to choose one with a comma at the end, so that is D. Great. Okay. Number 23. In 2010, archaeologist Noel Hidalgo Tan was visiting the 12th century temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia when he noticed markings of red paint on the temple blank. With the help of digital imaging techniques, he discovered the markings to be part of an elaborate mural containing over 200 paintings. Cool. Okay, so this one is walls with, so we need to figure out how to structure that. So he noticed markings of red paint on the temple walls. With the help of digital imaging techniques, he discovered, okay, so we're trying to break up this sentence. This one is D. This should be a period after walls, and then this introductory phrase, with the help of digital imaging techniques, comma, he discovered da-da-da-da. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Let's see. Working from an earlier discovery of Charpentier's, chemist Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, winners of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors of a species of DNA-cleaving bacteria, blank, a tool that is revolutionizing the field of gene technology. So this is number 24. We've also got another grammar question here. So we are going to take a look at this section here. They're wanting us to use some form of the word forge. So recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors of a species of DNA-cleaving bacteria to forge a tool. Okay, forging a tool. If it was forging, we would want a comma before forging, but we don't have one, so we're going to get rid of that. Forged, that doesn't match because we would need some kind of transition word like which forged a tool or something like that. And forging separates the subject from the predicate, so this one is A, to forge. Number 25. Another conventions question. So, by reducing the runoff flowing into city sewers, blank. Okay. So, this one is a little bit different, which you can see if you're following along with your eyes and not just listening. These answers are quite long, so let's take a look at why that is. So it says, the mitigation of both street flooding and the resulting pollution of nearby waterways has been achieved by bioswales. Okay, so this one uses what's called passive voice, has been achieved by bioswales. What we want to say is something like bioswales or the use of bioswales has achieved this result, right? We don't want to make it seem like we're trying to hide who did it, right? We want to be able to say, I broke the vase instead of the vase got broken, right? It sounds like you're a little kid that's trying to get out of getting in trouble or something. So that's how I think about passive voice. So what we're going to do is cross off A. We know that's not it. So I like B and C because I'm already seeing bioswales at the beginning. So let's just see what's going on. So with B, it says the bioswales have mitigated both street flooding and the resulting pollution of nearby waterways. Okay, let's hold on to that. C says the bioswale's mitigation of both street flooding and the resulting pollution of nearby waterways has been achieved. So this is tricky because this is still passive voice, has been achieved, right? So they're treating this whole frontal part like a phrase. The mitigation of this has been achieved, right? So just noticing that bioswales is at the front doesn't mean that it's acting like the subject or the actor, right? The active subject, I guess you could say. This is still passive voice. So that's clearly what they're testing you on in this section, or for this question specifically. So this one, same thing, have been mitigated. This one is B. So that's the only one that uses the opposite of passive voice, which is called active voice. One key way to think about this, and it's not a foolproof way, but this is one way to differentiate if you know you're trying to assess passive voice versus active voice, is you'll notice with the passive voice answer choices, they almost always, in this case, always use a helping verb with the verb. They have been achieved, have been mitigated, has been blah, 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 right? If you are using a classic, active voice structure, it will say they did this, like she wrote the paper, the bioswales mitigated this or have mitigated this, right? So the reason I say that this is not foolproof is because you can still have, like we have in this case, the need for a helping verb for other reasons besides creating the voice of the passage. So in this case, we are using have mitigated because we are thinking about a progressive tense. So what that means is if you start doing something at one point on a number line or a timeline, right? You continue doing that into the future by the time the sentence is written. So it started in the past and it's still going on, right? So there's this range of time that has not yet ended. By contrast, if you talk about something that you did in the past, like I, taught English, great, that's past tense, right? If you say I have tutored English, that's what I'm doing now. You might follow it up with like for some number of years. That would be what we're looking at here, this progressive tense. So that's the difference between something like past tense and past progressive tense. Cool. I hope that's helpful. So like I said, it doesn't apply in this question, but it is often a trick you can use if you're not already working within a sentence structure that doesn't require the helping verb. Okay, so for number 26, this says, a study published by Rice University geoscientist Ming Tong in 2019 offers a new explanation for the origin of Earth's blank. Structures called arcs, towering ridges that form when a dense ocean plate, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is another conventions question, so let's take a look at what we're trying to plug in here. So this is continents geological. So we need to figure out how that fits in with the rest of the paragraph. So clearly, it's Earth's continents, the continents belonging to Earth, right? So this study offers a new explanation for the origin of Earth's continents. Then we have geological structures called arcs, towering ridges that form when a dense ocean plate subducts under a less dense continental plate, blah, 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 right? So what I'm noticing here is we are going to need to separate these words. A is not going to work because it doesn't separate them. It's two separate thoughts, right? We're trying to figure out, okay, they're introducing a new explanation. Then what's the explanation? It's that geological structures called arcs do this thing, right? So let's go through our options. B says continents : geological structures called arcs. Okay, so I immediately like this one because what a colon suggests, and I think, this is something that I always go over with my students because I think not a lot of people feel really confident in explaining exactly why they want to use this particular piece of punctuation They don't necessarily know the rules behind it. They just know that it feels right. Okay. So I'm going to kind of elucidate for you what those rules are and why you have that feeling. The feeling is, for many of you, what's called native speaker intuition. It's just something that we pick up on when we're little and we're learning the language and we hear people using it. And nobody really sits us down and says like, okay, when you're writing, you're going to use a colon in this way, right? At least many of us didn't have that kind of education. I could go into all the reasons for that, but that's a separate story. So what I'm going to do now is tell you why. So the reason you would use a colon is to take something and then give an example of it, a direct example. So in this case, I really like it because they say this offers a new explanation. And then it's like your immediate follow-up question is, what's the explanation, right? And so then if you were to use a colon, you could then say, here's the explanation. Okay. Another case you would use a colon is to introduce a list. So you could say, I bought 3 things at the grocery store: apples, bananas, potatoes, right? So you would put, I bought 3 things at the grocery store, colon, and then list the 3 things. So again, it's kind of a way of thinking about like you're giving not only examples, but kind of a direct definition in that case of exactly what you bought. So yeah, I really like B for this reason. Let's kind of give the other ones some credence though and just see what they're presenting us with before we make a decision. So C says continents with a semicolon, geological. So a semicolon is another one of those ones that people are kind of like, I don't really know when I should throw that in there. A lot of my students say like, I just put it in there to look fancy or to say like, you know, I'm writing a paper for school and I feel like my teacher probably would like it better if I use semicolons, like it looks better. In reality, the rule for semicolons is that you're going to use a semicolon to separate 2 distinct phrases from one another. They are related phrases, so they can still hang out in the same sentence, but they are not reliant on each other grammatically. So by contrast, with the colon, if you say, I bought 3 things at the grocery store, colon, apples, bananas, and potatoes, apples, bananas, and potatoes by itself is not a sentence, right? It's a phrase. So you can't leave it. You can't put a period at where the colon is and then leave the rest of it and have it make sense. What you can do with a semicolon is put a period there and have both sides still read as totally functional, grammatically correct English sentences. So let's test that theory. So this says, a study published by Rice University, blah, 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 offers a new explanation for the origin of Earth's continents. Period. That works. That's fine. Geological structures called arcs, towering ridges that form when a dense oceanic plate subducts under a less dense continental plate, melts in the mantle below, and then rises and bursts through the continental crust above. Okay, so that's also a complete sentence. So let's hold on to that. This is a really good question for explaining these kinds of things that people often aren't sure about. So D is just going to put a period there. So this is what I said, right? Like the option you can use sometimes to tell if a semicolon is possible to use is by just breaking these up as different sentences and seeing if they can float on their own. And they can. So we know that purely in terms of phrasal, fluency, B, C, and D are all fine. So now what we're actually evaluating in this question is which is the best option. Okay. So, let's see. D, I don't like because again, we could introduce more than what we are introducing. We could link these ideas, more closely than D is linking them, by using a colon or a semicolon, right? For the semicolon, you'll remember I said just a few moments ago that these are related ideas, but they're not directly relational. So For example, like if you were to say, and I'll type this for you guys. Let's see. If you were to say, I bought 3 things at the store, apples, bananas, and potatoes. Okay? That's immediately related. It tells you exactly what those things are. It defines things, And then if you were to say, I bought 3 things at the store, semicolon, we could put all kinds of stuff at the end here. We could put, it was pretty crowded there for a Tuesday, right? So you don't have to be defining anything, right? You could also say something like, I bought 3 things at the store. Let's see. Only one of them was something I actually needed. Okay? So you're making some kind of relationship between the items, like, part A and part B here. But you're not necessarily saying that this is defining it. In this case, in 26, it is defining it. So we're going to go with B. I hope that makes sense. Again, if you have questions about it, hit me in the comments and I'm happy to explain more. Okay, number 27. And just so you guys know, we're going to go through to the end of Module 2 today. So see where it says stop right there. We've just got a couple more questions to go. So we're on number 27. We're going to say, during a 2021 launch, Rocket Lab's Electron rocket experienced an unexpected failure. Okay, so this question is asking us to complete the text with the most logical transition. So sometimes when we're identifying question types, they make it really easy for us. This is a transition question, right? So we just need to have a sense of how these 2 sentences or phrases relate to each other. What kind of relationship they have. Positive, negative, neutral, causal, right? Is one causing the other? That kind of thing. So that's what we're evaluating. Okay, so knowing that we're looking for something like that, let's read those sections. So we know this rocket experienced an unexpected failure. Its second stage booster shut down suddenly after ignition. Blank. Instead of downplaying the incident, Rocket Lab CEO publicly acknowledged what happened and apologized for the loss of the rocket's payload, which had consisted of 2 satellites. Okay, so the relationship between its second stage booster shut down suddenly after ignition, and instead of downplaying the incident, Rocket Lab CEO did this, is pretty neutral, right? So we're not saying, this but that, right? These 2 things can't exist at the same time, right? They're also not particularly positive relationships. It's kind of just giving us a sense of what happened in what order, right? So let's test our options. So its second stage booster shut down suddenly after ignition. A says, afterward, instead of downplaying the incident, Rocket Lab CEO did this. Sure, let's hold on to it. Additionally, instead of downplaying the incident, okay, so I don't like additionally because yes, it happened after, right? So additionally is like something we add on to something else, but we don't use additionally to talk about items on a linear timeline. We usually use additionally to talk about things that are true at the same time that are like, separate from the thing we've already mentioned. So I like blueberries. Additionally, I like raspberries, strawberries, tomatoes. Okay. So C is indeed. Indeed, instead of downplaying the incident. So indeed, I don't like here because indeed we're going to use when we're kind of doubling down on maybe like an impression that we have or an argument that we made in the previous sentence. But there's no argumentation here. There's no impression. It's not a personal opinion. It's, we're not proving anything, right? If they said something like, there's been a call for CEOs to be more transparent and, this particular CEO said that next time something happened, he would be. Indeed, the next time something happened, he publicly acknowledged what happened, right? So that's kind of proving the statement that we made at the beginning. But we don't have anything like that here. Similarly, is D. So similarly, instead of downplaying the incident, I don't like that either, because similarly implies a stronger relationship than what we have. It's saying that these two perhaps unrelated things, like at first glance unrelated things, have a commonality, right? That's usually part of some larger theme of the paper. So, we're going through allegedly like a recession right now, right? So we could say something like, this has an impact on, people who are trying to buy homes. Similarly, it has an impact on people who are trying to have children, right? These are not necessarily the same groups of people, but they have a similar problem. In this case, we're talking about something that's happening on a timeline, right? This first happened, then this happened. So we want afterward. That's the one that's built in, got the time built into it. Okay, I'm explaining a lot of these things just so you know, because a lot of people, I think, take for granted this gut feeling that we have when we read questions like this. And these questions are built to be really quick off the mark type questions. You're immediately supposed to know afterward, right? But like I said, the reason that that's the reason that that's an expectation for students is largely because they assume that you have this kind of native speaker intuition, or alternatively, that you have drilled this in school quite a lot, even if English isn't your first language. And that's not necessarily true for a lot of folks. There are a lot of people who apply to U.S. schools internationally who, have maybe studied English in school but haven't, used it colloquially as much, or just don't feel like they have this level of explanation ready to go in their head. Also, I think, in my opinion, public schools have done a disservice to students by not explaining this the first time around. So it's really no reason to be embarrassed if you have a gap in this kind of knowledge. I think it has been created, systematically. Not maybe on purpose, right? I don't think they're trying to get you down necessarily. They're not saying like, I don't want people to know the difference between additionally and similarly, right? There are just a lot of choices in education that have to be made. How are we going to teach this kind of thing? How are we going to assess this kind of thing, right? And certain things have to get chosen over others, and sometimes they choose right and sometimes they choose wrong, and often we don't know until decades later whether or not that was the right choice. So it's my opinion that this kind of teaching method where, they don't really go into the rules of grammar was a mistake. But that's why I'm here to help you. So I think for those of you who are thinking like, this is too much explanation for this kind of question, that's totally fair. I think a lot of us, are quick off the mark with this stuff as intended. But I would just ask you to think about those who, for whom that's not the case, and how you might be able to reach out to somebody in your class or somebody in your study group and help them out if it feels easy to you. Okay, so number 28. When soil becomes contaminated by toxic metals, it can be removed from the ground and disposed of in a landfill. Blank contaminated soil can be detoxified by phytoremediation. Okay, so this is another transition sentence. So what we are thinking about here is kind of similar to the last one, actually, where we're thinking about there's a situation and then the next thing that happens is this, right? So first, soil's contaminated. Then it's removed and disposed of. After that, contaminated soil can be detoxified, right? So it's this linear progression of events. So we're going to go ahead and, just like last time, kind of get rid of something like specifically, because specifically would be doubling down on, how it's disposed of in a landfill. But really what's happening is they're describing how the soil is broken down after it's been disposed of. So the same people who disposed of it are not the ones detoxifying it, right? It's plants actually that are doing it. So it's also not alternative, right? Because it's not in opposition to the disposal. It's just something that happens, right? It's also not, for example, because again, these are not directly causally related. So the detoxification is not an example of being disposed of. It's something that happens afterwards. So this is as a result. It can only happen if it's first disposed of in the ground, right? Great. Okay, 29. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Okay, you can already probably tell that this is a more labor-intensive question than the last one. So let's just read the question before we read the notes. So it says, the student wants to explain an advantage of the Hank Henry calendar. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so we want to find an advantage. So something positive, right? So let's try to find something positive. So the first bullet point says it's defining a feature of the Gregorian calendar, right? So it says the Gregorian calendar has 365 days. Because 365 days can't be divided evenly by 7, the number of days in a week, calendar dates fall on a different day of the week each year. Okay, so that's identifying a problem with the Gregorian calendar. The third bullet point says the Hank Henry permanent calendar, developed as an alternative to the Gregorian calendar, has 364 days. Okay, so that's a fact about it, not an evaluation. The fourth bullet point says, because 364 can be divided evenly by 7, calendar dates fall on the same day of the week each year, which supports more predictable scheduling. Okay, so that's the positive, right? It's solving a problem. So the answer choices, we're going to try to find that in them. So it's not A, because it doesn't really matter. Like the crux of the issue is not that it's one day longer or shorter than the other one, right? That's not the reason it's positive. That's the thing that allows it to change, but that's not the end all be all. B says, adopting the Hank Henry permanent calendar would help solve a problem with the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so that sounds a lot like what I just said, right? Let's hold on to B. C says, designed so calendar dates would occur on the same day of the week each year, the Hank Henry calendar supports more predictable scheduling than does the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so this is nice because it tells us why. So B does say, it would help us solve a problem, but it doesn't say what the problem is. Okay. And D says the Hank Henry permanent calendar was developed as an alternative to the Gregorian calendar, which is currently the most used calendar in the world. So that doesn't tell us why it's positive. It's just another fact, right? So between B and D, we're trying to find something which accomplishes the goal to explain an advantage. We're not just trying to say, who cares? Why are we interested in this? We're trying to explain an advantage. Okay. So this one is C because it explains, right? It says, here's the situation. It doesn't just say it solves a problem, right? So that one's C. Number 30. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Same dealio. The student wants to present the influence theory to an audience unfamiliar with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Probably butchering that. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So we're going to present the influence theory to an unfamiliar audience. Okay. We have to assume they know nothing, right? So we're definitely going to want something that, for example, I don't really think A is it. It doesn't give us enough information. A just says it was very influential, but it doesn't say how or why or what it is. Let's just take a look at the notes. So this confederacy is a nearly 1,000-year-old alliance of 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S. Next bullet point, the members are bound by a centuries-old agreement known as the Great Law of Peace. Okay. Third bullet point, historian Bruce Johansen is one of several scholars who believe that the principles of the Great Law of Peace influenced the U.S. Constitution. Fourth bullet point, this theory is called the influence theory. Fifth bullet point, Johansen cites the fact that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both studied this confederacy. Great. Okay, so these two are the most important, right? We're defining the influence theory to someone who doesn't know what it is. So let's take a look. B says the influence theory is supported by the fact that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both studied. Okay, so that's really related to the last bullet point, and we don't know what the influence theory is, so that's kind of meaningless to us, right? So C says the influence theory holds that the principles of the Great Law of Peace, a centuries-old agreement binding 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S., influence the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so that's really good. It tells us what the thing is, influence theory, and what it holds, what it means, right? The principles of this do that. Okay. D says Native people, including the members of this confederacy, influenced the founding of the U.S. in many different ways. So again, it's like, sure that they influenced the founding, that's true, but it doesn't even mention the influence theory, and it doesn't try to define it at all. So this one is C. Okay, same type of question for number 31. It says the student wants to emphasize how hot the sun is relative to nearby stars. Which choice does this the best? Okay. So let's read the notes. First one says, in 1999, astronomer Todd Henry studied the differences in surface temperature between the sun and nearby stars. Great. Okay. Sure. 2, his team mapped all stars within 10 parsecs, approximately 200 trillion miles of the sun. Okay. So far, we haven't really gotten anything super useful. 3, the surface temperature of the sun is around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which classifies it as a G star. Okay, so I like that bullet point because it gives us a quantitative measurement of how hot the sun is, right? So we need to do that we need to have that in order to create a relationship between it and the heat of other stars. So this says 327 of the 357 stars in the study were classified as K or M stars with surface temperatures under 8,900, so cooler than the sun. So that's the relationship, right? And then this one says 11 of the 357 stars in the study were classified as A or F stars with surface temperatures greater than 10,300. So that's hotter than the sun. So this is also useful. So let's also highlight that. Okay. So let's go through the options. So it says at around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which classifies it as a G star, the sun is hotter than most, but not all of the stars within 10 parsecs of it. So again, this is true, but let's see what else we have. B says astronomer Todd Henry determined that the sun at around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit is a G star, and several other stars within a 10 parsec range are A or F stars. So that doesn't really show us the full reality. It doesn't give us the ratio, right? So we'll cross out B. C says, of the 357 stars within 10 parsecs of the sun, 327 are classified as K or M stars with surface temperatures under 8,900 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, sure, but it doesn't tell us how hot the sun is, right? It just kind of gives us this 8,000 something number as if we're supposed to know what that is, and we don't. So D says, while most of the stars within 10 parsecs of the sun are listed as K, M, A, or F stars, the sun is classified as a G star due to its surface temperature at blah, blah, blah. So this one, again, doesn't give us a relationship. It just says, here's what they measure. So this one is A. All right, last page, last 2 questions, and then it's the weekend. So 32. Same structure, and 33, if you look ahead, is also the same structure. So let's read the question. It says, the student wants to introduce Katherine Halverson's book to an audience already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So we're introducing Katherine Halverson's book to someone who already knows the Atlantic Monthly. So we know we don't need to explain what the Atlantic Monthly is. So already looking at the notes, the first one explains what the Atlantic Monthly is. We get it. We already know. We don't need to use that. 2, the magazine focused on politics, art, and literature. Same deal. We already know that, right? If we're the audience, we already know that. In 2019, historian Katherine Halverson published the book Faraway Women and the Atlantic Monthly. Sure, so that introduces the book. We need that. Good. Its subject its subject is female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. All right, one of the authors discussed is Juanita Harrison. Okay, great. So let's take a look at our options. Katherine Halverson's Faraway Women in the Atlantic Monthly discusses female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. True. Okay. Let's take a look at B. A magazine called the Atlantic Monthly was first published. Okay, so get rid of that. That's explaining to us what the Atlantic Monthly is. C says Faraway Women in the Atlantic Monthly features contributors to the Atlantic Monthly, first published in 1857. So this is again telling us about the magazine. We don't need that. Last one. An author discussed by Katherine Halverson is Juanita Harrison, whose autobiography appeared in the Atlantic Monthly in the early 1900s. So this one doesn't influence us into understanding the book anymore. It doesn't introduce anything. It just tells us some facts, right? So we are going to go with A. It actually explains what the book is about and then just, refers to the magazine as if we already know what it is. Last question. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. And then the question is, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two ways that a magnificent frigate bird acquires food. Okay, which choice most effectively uses relevant information, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to try to figure out what are the two ways that the magnificent frigate bird acquires food and how are they similar? Okay. So it says the magnificent frigate bird is a species of seabird that feeds mainly on fish, tuna, squid, and other small sea animals. Okay, it's unusual among seabirds in that it doesn't dive into the water for prey. One way it acquires food is by using its hook-tip bill to snatch prey from the surface of the water, so that's one. Another way it acquires food is by taking it from weaker birds by force, so that's two. This behavior is known as kleptoparasitism. Sure, that's fine. Let's look at the answer choices. So we're going to try to, find something that says, for example, like one of the strategies for questions like this is to decide what you think the answer should look like. So if you read the notes and you say, okay, one way it acquires food is by using its hook-tip bill to snatch prey from the surface of the water, and the other one is it takes food from birds by force, you can say like, okay, what's similar about those two things? One is that, maybe it has this like intimidation factor, right? Like it's clearly a predator and it has this like hook tip bill, which is maybe a little scary looking to other birds. We know it's stronger than other birds, right? So we know also another similarity is that it's not diving, it's totally doing everything surface level. So both of these actions happen on the surface, right? It's kind of skimming the surface to get these birds, and then it's stealing fish from birds who presumably have already dove into the water to get the fish. So A says a magnificent frigate bird never dives into the water, instead using its hook-tip bill to snatch prey from the surface. So, obviously it's true, but it doesn't have two ways. It doesn't compare anything. B says neither of a magnificent frigate's bird's two ways of acquiring food requires the bird to dive into the water. Okay, true. Let's hold on to that though. Of the magnificent frigate bird's two ways of acquiring food, only one is known as kleptoparasitism. So okay, true, but that's not really a useful comparison to make. We don't learn anything about the methods. We just learn one of them has this name and the other one doesn't. And it's like, of course, right? D says, in addition to snatching prey from the water with its hook-tip bill, a magnificent frigate bird takes food from other birds by force. So that lists it, sure, but I'm not going to choose it because it doesn't create a similarity. It just says what happens. So this one is B. We know that it doesn't require the bird to dive into the water. So that would go for this bullet point right here. Great. All right, we have reached the end of this particular module. Next time, we are going to work on another test because we have completed SAT number 4. So great job if you guys were following along. We're totally going to skip the math because I'm a humanities teacher and that is what I do. I just do the humanities. So we are going to take a look at another SAT practice test. The other day, I also did an ACT practice test. So if you are just dying to have more content in between now and then, you can go onto my channel and watch that video as well. If you're taking both tests, that's great. You'll notice as I walk through them with you in those videos that they are distinct, even though they cover similar material. So if you ever need someone to work on that with you and help you figure out how to implement efficient strategies across both tests, reach out to me. I'd be happy to work with you. You can find me on Instagram at Your Humanities Tutor, and you can find me on my website at stembrainstutor.com. Thank you so much, and it was great completing this test with you. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.